I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today in the show, we are joined by Clay Newcomb, Josh Hillyard, and Justin Michaud to break down 2 September whitetail hunts. Let's see what we can learn from these 2 very different experiences. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. Today, we're playing a little bit of Monday morning quarterback. By that, I mean we're going to take a look back at 2 different hunts that just happened here in September 2021, and we're going to analyze what happened, what went right, what went wrong, what do we learn from this, yada, yada, yada. And what's interesting is we've got 2 very different kinds of hunts. We've got one private land hunt. We've got one public land hunt. We've got one American hunt. We've got one Canadian hunt. We've got one hunt with a guy who prefers wearing overalls. We've got one hunt with a guy who prefers wearing a semi-flat bill hat. So this is all about contrasts today. We got me and Furter, Josh Hillyard, are going to be talking about our recent Western public land whitetail hunt. And then I've got Clay Newcomb and Justin Michaud, who are going to talk about their Manitoba whitetail hunt. So that's the game plan. And I think we should kick it off talking Canada. Clay, give me some background on what this is all about. How did this hunt come about? You know, how did this happen? Where did you go?
So first of all, if you're going to hunt in Canada and you're not from Canada, you have to have an outfitter. So you have to go through an outfitter. So there's really no do-it-yourself hunts for guys like us coming from the States going into Canada. But as Justin, I think, would agree, this is probably the best case scenario for kind of a do-it-yourself guy wanting to go there. And I do have some 3 years of history on this farm with this outfitter. His name's Tom Ainsworth. And it's probably, Mark, my favorite hunt of the year, like above everything I do. It's, a lot of the hunts that I'm doing, bear hunting, backcountry stuff, it's hard. I mean, it's like you're sleeping under the stars, you're fighting against, you're tent camping, you're doing a whole lot of you're hiking. Physical fitness is an issue, low density animals. Man, this to me is like exactly opposite of that. We're staying in a house. We're eating 3 meals a day at a dinner table. Aside from at times in Canada, tough weather to deal with, which we did not in this early season hunt. And it's just an incredibly fun hunt. We see a lot of deer, and the people that we hunt with have kind of become like family to me. Tom and Deb Ainsworth. So this was my 4th year to go there. I've been there the last 3 years. Well, the last 4 years minus COVID. Last year I didn't go. This is my 4th year. And I've had incredible luck up there in Canada. I've killed, the first year I was there, I killed a 152-inch buck with my bow. Second year I killed a really nice 8-point that I would shoot every year of my life for the next however many years that is. It didn't score real well, but it was a real heavy horned, tall G2s, just a really gnarly old buck. And then the third year I killed a 156-inch deer. So ton of history. But this year I couldn't go during the rut. The 3 times prior I've been the first 7 days of November, essentially. And this year I couldn't do that. So we bumped it all the way back. Manitoba has an early whitetail season that starts on August 31st. And so that's when I went. Our first hunting day was the evening of August 31st. And, yeah, just to describe the type of hunting, we were hunting alfalfa fields. It's cropland that juts right up against what the Canadians call the bush, which is what we would call national forest. And their bush is thick. There's really not a lot of opportunity for getting back in there and finding travel patterns like back in the timber for these deer coming out in these fields. It's super thick, very thick. And so we're hunting these deer in crop fields. And this year, every year the farm's a little bit different with what crops are there. And this year there was a limited amount of alfalfa and a lot more oats. And that I felt like was advantageous to us because the deer seem to prefer the alfalfa. They also eat the oats. But yeah, so that's where it all started, Mark.
That's perfect. What was the game plan, and like where was your head at leading into day one? I mean, you'd had 3 previous years of experience. So did you come into this knowing, okay, based on what I know, I'd really like to hunt in this spot or this spot and this spot, and I think they're going to do this, this, and this? Or did you come into it, thinking that this might be totally different because the crops are in different places and all that kind of stuff?
It's the kind of place, Mark, that I pretty much there was an 80% chance that I knew exactly what was going to happen. And that was true. I mean, I pretty much hunted in the places I assumed that I would hunt. These deer are pretty unpressured and they're pretty predictable. And it worked out just about like what I thought.
Okay. So then talk to me about what, you got there day one. You drove in, right? You drove in.
Yeah, we drove up to Canada. For me, it was an 18-hour trip. I picked up Justin, and we arrived early in the morning, like at 3 a.m. And we were out scouting shortly after daylight, and saw some deer, saw some bucks on the alfalfa right where we hoped they would be. It was the first place we pulled into. Basically, we saw bucks on the alfalfa. And so it was a 10-acre rectangular block of alfalfa that had a big, like 40 to 50 acre tract of oats to the side of it. And the wind our first afternoon, the wind was coming out of the south. And so we hunted the north side of this alfalfa. And it's big, I mean, it's 350 yards probably to the other end. And so you're kind of just guessing, hoping that they are coming within, 40 yards of your tree. And Justin and I both had saddles. And so we were able to set up in a real small tree that, had never been hunted to our knowledge. I mean, we had to trim it out and everything. And got in the stand probably 4 hours before dark. And that first evening, we had bucks come on the field, just kind of prime time, an hour to an hour and a half before dark, had bucks come on the field. And then the last 30 minutes of daylight, Justin said, "Oh man, there's a stomper buck that just stepped out." I don't remember his exact phraseology, but I'm pretty sure stomper. That seemed to be something. Is that your phrase, Justin? Is that what you say?
No. I can't remember what I said at this point. I was gonna piggyback though. What was cool. I've not to take away from where Clay was going, but what was neat was I've only been to an outfitter a couple times, never for whitetail. And like Clay said, this place was like as close as you could get to just like knocking on a door and getting permission. There were stands set, but like Clay mentioned, like we went in that morning when we went in to scout. We came up to that field, and as soon as Clay came around the corner, he like dropped down, and he said, "There's a shooter right here." So we felt good right away about that alfalfa because there was that was probably, we were way into daylight, and there was a shooter that didn't see him, but was, had his head to the ground eating. And so we backed out and knew like that we had a pretty good scenario there. And we drove around a bit more, and a lot of the fields that typically held alfalfa, from what Clay said in previous years, were somewhat empty. So again, like it just kind of stacked the deck a little bit more in our favor as far as like there's not a ton of places that these deer are going to want to be right now. And but yeah, we were, that first night setup, we were positioned in a way that we could both have eyes, and we both had binos. And we had a doe. And probably, it's hard to tell you, like, at home that would be probably a 3.5-year-old buck, but Clay swears that those deer are 2.5 there that are that size because their bodies are just huge. But we had a doe and a buck come out early, and, he was in full velvet. I don't know. He was like a nice 8. Was it an 8 or 10, Clay?
8 point.
Yeah. Nice deer, came out, fed a little bit. And then he and doe went late on the field edge and just decided it was a great place to nap. So we watched them for probably an hour. And we watched deer messing around, and they started coming out, and I call it a slammer.
Slammer. I knew it started with an S.
There we go.
Yeah. And then next thing you know, man, I had been watching this deer in velvet, and I was like, gosh, that's a nice deer, like it, for being the first deer that we saw. I'm like, all right, this is great. And then this other deer came out, and all of a sudden that other buck, the velvet buck, just was dwarfed. And I had seen a few photos, and then we were at Tom's house, and I got to see one of the deer he had on his wall, which I think was a 208 or 209 that was from that property. And they have their frame seems pretty unique. I mean, it's like, seems like a genetic thing there. And when he came out, his rack looked like it was glowing red. I mean, it was just like, you could tell it hadn't been too long since he had shed. It just looked fresh, and his body was like a cow. So I was like, man, we are in the game.
So the slammer stepped out, and Clay, how far away was he at this point?
Probably 250 to 300 yards. He was a good ways off, and we pretty much knew we were out of the game because the deer stepped out on the total opposite edge of the field. But being the first day, that's all we wanted. We just wanted to locate a shooter buck. And the thing about this outfitted hunt is Tom, and I've learned to love this. He doesn't do a lot of reconnaissance. I mean, it wasn't like he has kind of a philosophy that he wants his hunters to hunt. And so he knew there was a big buck there, but he didn't give us much intel. He didn't show us pictures. And so, we kind of discover this buck, and we're like, okay, that's the deer we're after. And Mark, I believed it to be 150-inch mainframe 10.
Nice.
I would have thought too.
He could have been 147, or he might have been 155, but just a classic 10 and heavy horned. And man, those deer, from having killed 3 deer up there, they'll weigh in at 250 pounds, almost on the dot. I've killed 3. One weighed 240, one weighed 248, and one weighed, I don't think I ever killed one actually that weighed 250. The biggest one was 248. So, they're just big deer for us. A big deer at Arkansas is going to weigh 175 pounds.
Yeah.
Big mature buck. And so, when they're that big of body and the horns look fairly big, you're talking about a 150-inch deer usually, if it's a 10 point, And so we were in the game that night. Tom came and picked us up in the field. We busted these deer off the field, to get out. Felt like that was the best thing to do. Justin, feel free to tell any of these stories, man. But I'm just going to kind of march through, Mark, if you want me to.
Yeah, march me through. But I want to throw in one thing before you give me the full detail on day 2. I really want to know the thought process behind how you were planning to adjust. Like, give me the full rundown of how you were thinking about where to set up day 2, because I'm imagining you're taking into account where you saw that deer. You got to take into account the wind direction and God knows what else. So walk me through that.
Sure. Now. Okay. So there's timber on 3 sides of this field. One side of the field butts up against another big oat field. And I just felt like we were going to swap back and forth sides based upon pretty much every day. There was some version of a north wind or some version of a south wind. So you could hunt one side of the field or the other. And we were watching these deer kind of where they're at. And Tom had a shooting house. I mean, basically like a enclosed blind up on a platform.
It looked like a porta potty. A green porta potty.
Yeah.
And it's about the same size.
Yeah, that's about right. And all these deer were within bow range of that porta potty. And so the next day we actually went in trying to we were going to hang a set, hang out of our saddles. And I convinced Justin, I was like, dude, we need to get in that thing because it's going to protect us from any kind of swirling wind. And all those deer were pretty close to that blind.
And mind you, that first night we probably saw, 15 to 20 deer. And most of those deer came out on that end towards the blind.
Yeah. Yeah. So our plan was to hunt the south end the next day. And so eventually we would end up there. But the next morning, Mark, and this is probably the most unique stand on the property. And from a whitetail strategy perspective, I would be interested if Mark Kenyon and Josh Hillyard would come to this property and would see this stand and would not be like, I would be interested to see if you would have thought if it was a good spot, because I didn't.
The porta potty spot or a morning spot?
No, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This is a third spot.
I'm about to describe where we sat in the morning.
Okay. Perfect.
And so basically there's a main county road that bisects the property. I mean, a main county road. This alfalfa field, let's say it sets 300 yards off the road. And it's going to be really hard to describe and boring if I take 10 minutes trying to describe the exact layout. But basically, through observation over decades, Tom has been like, those deer always come by this little corner and cross the main road and go back to bed on the other side of the road. And I just don't think you would be looking at an aerial map and figure that out. I mean, you just wouldn't. It's just not intuitive that those deer cross right there. And the first year I hunted with Tom, he put me in that stand and I was just thinking, oh boy, here we go. The rancher, Tom's a rancher, man. I mean, he does, they don't whitetail hunt kind of like we do because they don't have to. Right. They know the patterns of these deer so well that, they kind of cut through the riffraff of sometimes and they're just like, hey, those deer cross right there. Just hunt there.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Like, we'd have been thinking like, all right, let's try and get in close to bedding and blah, blah, blah. And Tom's like, you see this 2-track? I put that in there so the deer walk down it. And sure enough, you sit on this stand that's like 10 yards off of this 2-track so that he runs his quads around. Like that's just how he accesses around his property. Bear, just to the dirt. And you would think like, well, I kind of got screwed here. Like I literally, you're in the stand within like 30 seconds of being dropped off from the road. So
yeah, you're hunting. I mean, you've got 1,600 acres and you're within a muzzleloader shot of a main road that like school buses are driving down, and it's a gravel road. There's not a lot of traffic on it, but I don't think Justin saw the school buses, but usually I do. But I've hunted there 3 years, and I'm telling you, I believe that if a man were to go there, and this is usually 6 days of hunting, if you sat in that tree for 6 days, you'd kill a big mature Canadian buck. I mean, it would be so boring because you don't always see deer. Just some percentage of the time, these deer exit these fields and come that way. I would say 30% of the time. I think 30 to 40. So if you sat there 10 mornings, I think you would have deer within bow range 3 to 4 times.
Clay, is there, sorry to interrupt, but now that you've actually sat the spot, right? So it's not like you've only looked at the map. You've actually been on the ground and actually seen it. Is there any rhyme to why? Like, can you understand now why the deer passed through? Like, is there some little topography thing or something?
I think it has to do with they could walk in the timber the whole way and be covered by timber and cross the road. I think these deer are so unpressured, it's just easier than walking through timber. So they walk down the edge of this timber. And no, I'm serious. There are multiple things that they could do that I would have predicted that they would do before they do this. So there's not a lot of reason to it other than it's highly predictable. Because in 3 years, I have personally seen multiple mature bucks crossed within bow range of that stand.
Wow.
And if you could picture it, there's a bit of a curve on this 2-track. And so if you followed the curve to the road, then that's like how we would get in, right? But if you, or like a really open J, right? And what's happening is they're walking down the straight part of that J, and right as it starts to curve, which is probably, Clay, would you say 40, 50 yards from the road?
Yeah.
Okay, so right when that J starts to curve, they cut into the woods right there. And, again, we didn't investigate too much, but what they end up doing is crossing that road. But for some reason, they're cutting in right there. And maybe they just don't want to go in the driveway. I don't know. But that, like, consistently, that's what they're doing, is just following that road straight in.
Yeah.
So you sat next to the road. Did you see the big giant?
So this is a great morning stand, though, because you can't even see the alfalfa field. So these deer are on the alfalfa. You walk in the dark just out of the truck, climb up in this tree. You don't spook any deer, and then you're positioned for their exit. That's what it happens. So on the next morning, Mark, just after daylight, we saw 3 bucks exit the field and come within 10 yards of our tree. One of the deer was a nice full velvet 8-point. I would have suspected him in the 120s as score wise. I mean, a nice looking deer, but not a deer that I was interested in shooting, which, spoiler alert, there's a little bit of drama involved in this. So
don't tell it yet.
I passed this deer, but they come right in. What's interesting too is this whole time we're watching a very large bear out in the oats, probably 500 yards from us.
So you're conflicted.
Not really conflicted. I was pretty interested in the deer, but it was kind of cool to be watching these deer and a bear out of the same tree stand,
Yeah.
So I passed these deer on the first morning. So that evening, Mark, we go to the porta potty stand, and it's bigger than a porta potty. It'd be like a 2-seater porta potty.
Oh yeah, those are good. Is this the night you sent me your scent control video?
Yeah, that's it.
The scent control video. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
We're not going to get on that because there's another conflict of some people don't,
Well, now you got to explain.
We just kept talking about.
I don't want to wreck people's worldviews on scent control just yet. I mean, later, Mark.
Okay.
Later.
So continue.
I don't want to bankrupt the scent control companies. These guys are just trying to make a living.
I get that.
So the next day we get in probably 4 hours before dark and set in this stand. And Mark, it was perfect. We saw 15 bucks. I'm trying to fast forward because we saw 15 deer, many of them within bow range of our stand. We're looking over this alfalfa, and 30 minutes before dark, we see the slammer buck. Justin says, there's a slammer buck. And he's looking 400 or 500 yards across the oats. And here comes this buck that we'd seen the evening before, coming from the total opposite direction, crossing a wide open field for several hundred yards to enter into the alfalfa. And he walks within probably 8 yards of where we were sitting the night before in our tree saddles. And we basically watch it get dark while he is just prancing around within bow range of where we sat the evening before. And it was pretty incredible. I mean, at this point, I've seen the deer twice now on the alfalfa. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
You know, and I just tell Justin, and I mean, we had the same thought. It's just like, dude, we just got to keep doing this. And eventually, you know, he's going to end up here. We hadn't spooked the deer. But
it was interesting too, because, you know, that alfalfa field was just like so lush and green. And I was surprised how much these deer were spending time in these oats. And when we say oats, like they were like brown, like tall brown oats. It's not fresh green growth. And they were in there just like, you know, hitting them hard. So you almost had to keep eyes in the oats as much as you did in the alfalfa. Again, that alfalfa field, how big would you say that field was, Clay?
I think Tom said it was 70 acres. Now that I think about it,
so that oat field was a lot bigger than the alfalfa field. But I mean, it was nothing to see these deer scoot right out of the alfalfa field and start feeding in these oats, and it, you know, looked like dry soybeans. But yeah, that's where he came from that night. He just was cruising across there, taking his time, and just he started working our way, but you know, dark got to us.
So next day.
Okay, so the next day we go back to the county road stand, and I'll give you a couple of clues, and then we'll dial this in here, and the story will be finished. Okay. The big buck was hard horned, and probably 80% of the other deer were in velvet. Okay. So that's one thing that is in my mind, that the big deer is hard horned.
Mm-hmm.
So the next morning we climb up in the stand where we'd passed the deer the day before. This is the county road stand, and it's overcast, so it's kind of dark, but the sun starts to come up. We're ready, and I pull up the binos, and I see 3 deer coming out of the alfalfa, turn and start coming our way, and I can tell they're bucks. But they're 300 yards away, and I can just see racks on all of them, and I can tell the one in the lead is hard horned. And this is where I made a mistake. And you know, it's kind of cool making a mistake, because I don't know, you just learn a lot from it. And I go back and I just like track what happened. And, you know, it was so dark, I couldn't see these deer real well, but I could see them through binos and I mean, you can see them with your naked eye, but once they make the corner, they're coming fast, you know. I mean, they're steady walking. So I pull up the binos one time, and the first deer is hard horned, and his horns come out to his ears, and he just looks like he's got a solid rack. And I just made the decision, that is the buck we're after. And that was it.
Like, he's the one from the night before.
That's right.
Yeah.
I say that's the big one. He's in the front. And man, I put the binos up, and I never looked back.
And they were like, once they came around that corner, they made their way out into that oat field and started feeding their way towards us. So it wasn't weren't hauling down that road like the three we had seen the day before. They were kind of taking their time, but we knew where they were going.
Yeah. And basically,
Clay, what is
Go ahead.
this day 3? Is this day 3 of the hunt?
yes.
Okay.
Morning of day 3.
Because we fit a bear hunt in that one second day, right?
I think so. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember that.
Yeah. So basically, this deer just comes into 25 yards, and I never scrutinized him. And I could tell that the deer behind him was bigger, but the way the wind was blowing, they were going to cross right into our wind. So I felt like I needed to shoot the first deer, and I felt like the first deer was a 150-inch deer. The one behind him was slightly bigger. Tom had seen a bigger buck the day before, and I felt like, man, I'm not going to get greedy and let this 150 walk past me and get downwind waiting for this bigger one. And so, man, he comes into 25 yards, and it's minutes. I mean, it's early. It's legal shooting light, but it is overcast and it is early. And I pull back, and I can see him perfect through the peep, but I'm not scrutinizing horns. And I just 10 ring him at 25 yards, just shoot. And just double lung. We hear a twop. He runs off, falls in the field, and I'm elated. And we go out there, and it is not the 150-inch buck at all. It's I don't even want to say what he would score, because I don't know, but it was a 2-year-old 8-point buck. And man, to say I wasn't disappointed would just be a lie. I was disappointed. I've been to Canada 3 times and killed really nice deer. We were after a really nice deer, and so I was very disappointed. And I hate to say it because there's just no getting around it. I shot the wrong deer 100%.
So Clay, tell me this: how do you? So I'm going to ask this to you, Clay, first, and then I'll ask Justin next. What does disappointed, just shot the wrong buck Clay look like and sound like in that moment?
I'm pretty hard on myself. I really am. I in some ways, people might see me as just kind of like happy-go-lucky, whatever happens, not a trophy hunter. But when it comes to whitetails, I'm probably a little bit different. I was quite disappointed. I really was, and partly because everything was in place for us to kill a good deer, and to end the hunt that quick. And I have a elaborate spiel on judging Canadian whitetails that is killer.
I heard about all the people that didn't kill big deer that he brought. So I knew what we were up against.
Oh, Mark, the other 3 years I've been to Canada, I've brought people with me, and every single person, nobody has walked out of Canada with a big Canadian whitetail. Every single person I've brought up there has made a mistake and shot 2-year-old deer.
Really?
One guy probably shot a 3-year-old deer, but it was a 120-inch deer. It's just like anywhere. They're not all big, so you could have a mature 4-year-old deer that had a 120-inch rack. That's possible. No, absolutely. I could tell you stories, and but every single one of them killed 2-year-old deer. And so I should write an article about judging trophy whitetails in Canada. And
well, Clay, you gotta tell me what's the secret to properly judging a trophy whitetail in Canada?
Well, you've got to make sure that you're looking at a 250-pound deer. This deer probably weighed 210 pounds is what I would have guessed. It was a big deer for me.
Yeah, it was big.
And the scale of his rack to his head, if he had weighed 250, he would have been what I thought he was. So when I judged him, I was like, that is a full-size full size Canadian whitetail buck. So you're looking at that body shape, body size, and then you gauge the horns, because the first deer I ever killed in Canada, I saw him at 80 yards and I thought, oh, that's a nice deer. That's probably a 120-inch deer. Based upon the scale of the way his horns looked based on his body. And, assuming I'm looking at 160 to 170 pound deer that have, 120-inch racks. Anyway, I thought this deer was a 125-inch deer. I shot the deer and he scored 152. So massive ground swell.
Yeah.
I woke up that deer like, holy cow. I said, I had no idea that their bodies were this big. And basically those 2 and 3 year old deer can look like studs. And they're not. So that's primarily my spiel. It's like, you really need to look at a lot of deer. You need to see these big deer up against these 2 year olds. You need to look for that mass. The older deer are almost always going to have really good mass. And, you just got to be careful.
Yeah. So now I got to switch it over to Justin. So 2 questions for you, Justin. Number 1, when you saw this buck coming in and Clay said, oh, it's the one, in your head were you like, oh yeah, that's the one? Or did you have this whisper in the back that's like, I don't think that's the right deer?
Honestly, man, I was, I really didn't get a chance to get good eyes on him. This was, I think, the first hunt that on the trip that I didn't bring my binos, and at the speed they were coming, I was just trying to make sure I had my act together. So, I was filming, I was just more focused on filming Clay, and I was shooting pretty wide at that point. So, being in my spot, there's just more things you had to be concerned with than, where those other situations I had the camera set up, everything was good. I had I felt confident in everything. It was still early, so we were trying to be careful and quiet and not do too much, before realizing the situation and figuring out where deer were. So I hadn't really spread my wings yet. And so when I saw the deer coming, I could tell they were bucks, but I wasn't able to really assess whether or not. And Clay said, he's like, man, there's the big one. He's at that corner and he's hard horn. There's 3 of them. He's like, the second one is bigger. And he started to, I started to get the like what he just said. I thought, oh, that second one must be the one maybe that Tom had seen as well. But I could tell Clay was going for the lead deer. And so I was just trusting his, what he could see. I didn't really have time to get eyes on it. And like he said, man, the bodies on these things, all I could see was, they were in the oats. It was brown, and it was overcast, and I wasn't able to pick the antlers out like I could in that alfalfa field. And so they were coming, and I was just making sure I was ready.
And then when Clay walked up on him, does Clay secretly lay down a bunch of cuss words, or is there some secret part of Clay that we don't see that comes out when he shoots the wrong buck? What did that look like?
Man, he was swearing at me I no, man, I'm in a unique situation because, here I am filming, right? That's my thing that I'm doing there. But I'm hunting. I'm just not shooting, right? I'm not getting to kill anything. And I spend a lot of time in the tree and in the field. And so I get the same range of emotion that you guys do. When when your dad shot that deer on the back 40, I'm feeling all the same things. Mm-hmm. And so when those deer came around the corner, my heart rate lifted, and I'm making sure I got my stuff together. But I also feel that anticipation that I would feel if I was where Clay was, and just, trying to keep my head together. So when he shot the deer, man, we were just so pumped, because we kept having encounters with this deer. And, there's always that crux where, okay, here's the deer and the bow's drawn. And the only thing now that you hope for is a good shot. And when he shot, I mean, it just, sound from heaven. It just like that deep cavity, clump sound. And he ran off and he got to the top of this little ridge and he tipped right over. And so like, it was it. That was it. It was like, it was done. It was awesome. We celebrated, here we go. Now we can shift focus a little bit. And we go walking up to it. And man, I can tell you like exactly what I started to think. I'm walking up and again, he's laying in oats that are brown, tan and brown. And Clay's like, here's a deer. And I look up from the camera for a second and I'm like, my first thought was, gosh, did he shoot a doe? And just for a split second. And then I saw the antlers and then I was looking at Clay and man, it hit me like a brick wall. Just like that disappointment that he felt, I could see it in his face. And I felt like I was paralleling what he was feeling because I just felt all of that. So he handled it well. It was one of those situations where, if I had a tripod, I probably would have stuck the camera on a tripod and just like walked away. But I filmed him, like I think most of all what you have to do in these situations is like, you gotta be authentic. You got to realize like, all right, like, okay, we killed a deer. It's not this deer's fault, right? He's dead. And Clay's not like slinging things and throwing his hat and being like, oh gosh, he's like, he's absorbing the fact that like, all right, I killed this deer. I killed the wrong deer, but here it lays, and I could, it's a very unique thing to be able to go in as a cameraman and do this, but you're participating in a way that you wouldn't if you were just on a film set. It's raw. You get to like when a doe blows at us in a tree, my gut sinks just like it does for you guys.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing, and yeah. He was disappointed. I was disappointed. And I think then we were just like, it's just like if you were by yourself and you killed this deer and you walked up on it, you're like, this isn't what I wanted, but we got meat and we have a story and it may not have played out like we hoped it would, but you just got to swallow it and move on.
Yeah. So Clay, this happened. You were disappointed. You gutted him, you brought him home, you did all the other stuff. You went out there and tried to kill a bear, yada, yada, yada. When you look back on it now, you've had some days now to think about it, to process it. What'd you learn from this experience? Like, what did you learn? What would you do different, if anything? What's the big takeaway here for you?
It's kind of like my wife and I have something that we say to each other when things don't go right. And we say, when you ride bulls, you get your teeth knocked out sometimes. And, when you're in Canada and there's just no cahoots about it, we're not like meat hunting in Canada, though the meat from these grain-fed deer is incredible. And I brought every stitch of it home and we will use that meat. But, I'm not saying that I went up there just to shoot a meat buck, And so you kind of get your teeth kicked in, but it's a pretty good problem in your life if you kill a deer in Canada and, you're disappointed about it. You probably have that's not really that big of a problem. But no, I just judged him too quick, and, I've killed a lot of deer with a bow, hunted up there a lot. And just every little thing that happens, you learn from it. And it's just another thing. I didn't have enough data points and I made my decision too quick. And here's the main thing. Another main thing I learned without getting into our bear hunt. This was a combo hunt and I was trying to bear hunt and deer hunt. And I don't think I'll do that again because it just put too much pressure on me. Because the whole time we were deer hunting, we were thinking, man, we got to kill a deer so that we can bear hunt or we're not going to have time to bear hunt. And I feel like the kind of this overall pressure that was on was on me solely by my choice, kind of put a bit of urgency on me that I typically wouldn't be hunting with. And so in that regard, perhaps I bit off more than I should have, and you need 6 days to go up there and kill a good whitetail usually. And I guess I just I was very confident going into the hunt. Now I texted Justin and told him there, I felt really humbled, I mean, I've been fortunate with some good deer, and I think even from a kid when I started bow hunting, I didn't let a lot of stuff get past me. I mean, I capitalized on a lot of good opportunities, and so I've kind of built kind of my perception of myself as a bow hunter. It's like, yeah, I'm proficient. Deer walks by, I'm probably going to kill it, and that's just kind of a dumb thing to think about yourself, because it's such a complex moment with so many different things. And no, I was just humbled. I really was just kind of humbled by it, and grateful that I made a clean shot on a deer. Very grateful for the deer.
Yeah.
And but also kind of evaluating my standards too. I mean, because when you kill a deer, you shouldn't feel bad. So I'm kind of personally moving through that. I've never shot a deer with that much ground shrinkage. Never. So that's a new experience for me, to shoot one that was that far off, I mean, so I'm kind of like, it's kind of dumb to feel bad about shooting a deer, and kind of goes against my principles in a lot of other areas of my hunting. So I'm kind of evaluating that, thinking about it,
Interesting. Well, I've never yet gone on a hunt or had a season where I don't come out of it on the other end having learned something new about myself. And certainly seems like you guys both had those kinds of takeaways. I mean,
yeah,
big buck or not, you grew. You learned something. Carry on.
Sure.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver, off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish, or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Tell us about your hunt, Mark.
Yeah, I wanna now throw a little bit of the hosting responsibility over to you guys now. I think I want to walk through some stuff, so I'll kind of talk through some of our thought process around this trip, and me and Josh can tell you what happened. But you guys jump in with all the follow-up questions that you want, and what details we miss out, let us know. So we went on a hunt just about the exact same time as you guys. I think our opening day was the day before, so August 30th. And this was public land, and this is the same place that me and Josh went and hunted last year. Last year, I think we started on September 3rd or 4th, so we were a little bit late. We missed opening day last year. This year, we'd be there the day before opening day, so we'd be able to scout and all that. And I don't know if you guys heard the story from last year, but listeners will remember that we went on this trip last year. It was our first time down to this piece of public land out there, and we kind of had a, for lack of a better word, a shit show kind of thing. It was just like every day there was other hunters kind of blowing our stuff up. There was one day where I'd gotten on 2 really good deer the night before, made a move on them, and then that next day a group of like teenagers on UTVs came driving through, like banging metal pots and pans or something together and screaming and hooting and hollering and driving all over the place. So I had this kind of negative experience. But at the same time, you know, we saw a good number of deer. I mean, we saw a lot of deer and a couple nice ones. I mean, Josh, you had one hunt where, I mean, the first hunt you had, there was like the best hunt of your life. What'd you see?
Yeah. I saw like 50, 60, 70 deer, something like that. Just an insane number of deer. And a lot of bucks, like 15 or 20 bucks, with a couple of those being shooters. So, I mean, the first night out of the gates, and we're like, all right, this place is awesome.
Yeah.
And then after that, the wheels just kind of started to fall off.
Yeah. So we knew this place had this potential, but also the fact that it had the potential to be a mess, because it's a little closer. It's significantly closer to a larger city center than I usually like to do out in these western public land hunts. It's outside of what I would normally do, but we were trying to find a place that was close to my cabin out there that had quality deer numbers, and this was the best I could find. So all that said, after last year, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back or not. I guess I never really asked you, Josh. I mean, I know we bounced back and forth on this, but like, what was your gut reaction coming into this summer? Like when you and I were talking, should we hunt here? Should we hunt here? Were you always like, we should really go back? Or was there something in your mind was like, nah, we really shouldn't? Like, I know what I was thinking, but.
Yeah, I was torn on it, honestly. And I think ultimately we made the right decision going back to the spot just for the sheer number of deer. The spot is just going to hold a lot more deer than some of the other spots we were looking at. I knew there was a chance we'd be dealing with more people, almost guaranteed at this spot. But even though we saw people last year and it was kind of a goat rodeo at times, I mean, we were still in deer almost the entire trip. So I think ultimately it was the right decision to go back here, just for the sheer number of deer that are in the area, as opposed to some of these other lower density spots we were looking at that may have some good bucks and maybe low pressure, but we could have gone the whole week without seeing a single deer too at some of these other spots.
Yeah. We made. Yeah. What's up?
What is the terrain like? What are you hunting?
Yep. So this spot is a river bottom. So there's hills on one side, and then down on the river, there's this big river that runs through a valley, and then there's public land that runs along the border of that river. And that public land is mostly grasses, shrubs, cottonwood trees, some sagebrush, and then just a bunch of other cover, just like thick Russian olive kind of stuff that runs along the edge of that river. So that's the public land. It's long and skinny. There's 2 access points. There's 2 different roads that go on either side of this that are separated by, I don't know, 4 miles, 5 miles, something like that. So there's like a 4 or 5 mile skinny stretch of public land that runs along this river that we have access to. And then outside of the public land, there are crop fields on the private land. Some of these crop fields are alfalfa. Some of it looked like maybe winter wheat. Some of it was corn, actually. So, you know, what we saw last year was that these deer obviously bed back in that cover along the river, and then they transition out towards the private land crop fields every night to feed. So, you know, the general pattern of what these deer do is simple, in that they head from the bedding area, which is all on this side, and they head to the feeding area, which is all on that side. The tough thing about it is that there's very little pronounced difference in any of those spots. So where those deer pop out, like how they choose to go from north to south, it could be almost anywhere. It's relative. It's different than hunting on like the back 40, Justin, where we kind of knew, oh, here's our little like 3-acre great bedding area. And there's a pretty darn good chance that if there's a big buck around here, he's going to be in this little 3-acre bedding area because that's the best thing around. And he's probably going to come out to this food source. No, it's like we have 5 miles of the same kind of great bedding cover, and we have 5 miles of the same kind of great food. And, you know, they could come in and out anywhere. And there's just very little that differentiates. And so our task was to do 2 things. We had to try to find something that would differentiate and help us pinpoint, like narrow down where these bigger bucks would come out. And then secondly, how do we do that knowing that there probably would be a bunch of other hunters again like last year? And ultimately, like my mental calculus was that I knew there's going to be other people. Like we both came into it knowing, okay, this place is probably going to get blown up with other people. Let's assume it. Let's just like go into this knowing that every day we're going to see people, and just knowing that off the bat, it will hopefully make it less stressful when it actually happens. It's like every day I was like, okay, don't get stressed out when you see other trucks here. Don't get upset when you see someone walking in, because it's just going to happen. Know it and have a plan for that. And ultimately what I believed is that I thought we could out hunt them. I thought that there was enough targets that we would be able to have success despite these other people. We could get back behind them. We could hunt them in a different way than everybody else out there wanted to do. So that was, that's the mindset we brought into it. I mean, that's basically where your head was at too, right, Josh?
No, for sure. That was the same type of thing where we thought we could maybe work around them, get in further than them, get deeper into the cover than what most people would like to do. And some of that was based on last year, where a lot of the kind of the preset stands that we saw and a lot of the hunting pressure we saw was kind of tight to the private. It didn't seem like there was many people that were getting too deep in there or really kind of going the extra mile. And I think we just thought we could work around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that what you guys did, was go, if there's this 5 mile stretch, I mean, assuming, 2.5 miles in, you're kind of in the middle of it. And that's a pretty good buffer that probably a lot of people wouldn't walk that far. I mean, how far were you guys in?
Yeah. So I think as I'm saying this, as I've been talking this out loud, I'm pretty sure I measured it, and it was like right around 4, I think, was what the distance was between the 2 points. And so, yes, exactly what you said. We, last year trekked in as far as we could get in one direction. We got in there pretty far, right about into the middle of it. And then this year, the idea was to start at the place where, I'd seen the most, and that ended up being about that far in. So by the time we got to the end of it, I was doing a 2-mile hike in to my stand every day. Now the problem that we eventually get to, and that we saw a little bit last year, and it continued this year, was that some people were getting access through the private land. So some of these people had, locals had connections, were able to shortcut in that we just couldn't do. But we did what we could, and that we got there the night before opening day, and we decided to split up and glass that first night and try to see, like, are these deer doing what we think they're doing? Is there any way we can get some intel that will pin down a little bit more of exactly where they're coming out onto this private land that might be able to help us choose where to start? So Josh, he was able to get up on one of those hills I was talking about on the one side of the river, and I was able to drive along a road on the opposite side of the river along the private fields. So we had 2 different perspectives looking in at the same general area. And then that night, we just glassed as much as we could and saw as much as we could. And I don't know, it was sort of useful in that it just confirmed our general idea, which was there's a lot of deer. There's a bunch of bucks. There was several bucks that, they're far enough away we could not tell exactly what they were, but I think we each saw a couple deer, Josh, that both you and I were like, okay, that could be a potential shooter, right? It was that kind of thing. And sure. I don't think either one of us was able, because of the various like topographical features and cover features, like it wasn't like we could pinpoint exactly where they came in and out of the private, but we knew in general, like, okay, this little corner that we thought would be good, there was a bunch of deer that came out. This little zone by that little fence gap that we liked last year, this seemed like there were some deer coming out around there. So we basically confirmed our hunches and told us that, yes, this is a spot worth starting on. A second thing it confirmed for me was that this was more towards like the eastern access point. It was a little bit closer to the eastern access. On the western access point was a spot where when I had actually been out here in the summer and checked it out once in the summer, it looked like the fields were not going to be planted in a green food source. It looked like wheat that had been harvested or something. And so in my head in the summer, I was like, oh, they're not going to be on the west side as much because of that. But when we came back now in September, they had replanted something, or something was coming back up green, because now there was a big green lush food source coming in there. So now both west and east sides might have something going on. So that was another thing in the back of our minds, was that, okay, the whole stretch now might still be attractive. So that all leads us to night number 1, where Josh and I both had 2 zones that we'd liked the previous year. The previous year, we had walked into this area about a mile and a half in from one of those access points and passed a spot where the private land comes about as close to the public as it does anywhere. And there's an alfalfa field that butts right up to it. And there's like a barbed wire fence that runs along the whole edge of the alfalfa field, and then one opening in that fence, like a big open gate. And it just seemed like, oh, this is obvious. This is an obvious spot a lot of people are going to go in. And I think that day last year, like, I don't know if it was drawing straws or whatever, but for whatever reason, you got that spot last year, and hunted it and liked it. And I had gone past you then that day and, got on a couple really good bucks, like 600, 700 yards further away. So now in 2021, we kind of just said, hey, you want to start back at that spot you liked last year? And I was like, I'll go to that spot where I saw those big ones last year. And those would be 2 good starting points. So that was what we decided to do. Those 2 spots lined up with the general movement we saw the night before. The wind was, if I was hunting in Michigan, I would have said the wind was really concerning, in that it was blowing generally towards bedding, but it was going to be blowing generally to that direction the entire week. So we knew we were operating within the fact that we had to make some kind of sacrifice. So the trick was, your wind's going to blow into some of the cover no matter what, every single day. So we just had to think about, which corner do we want to be blowing into when we positioned ourselves, and hoping that we could position ourselves in such a way that the majority of the deer traffic would be coming, from the front. So if you can envision like all the covers to our north, all the foods to our south, but we have southerly winds the entire week. So we had to hunt when it was like, if it was like a southwest wind, we'd position ourselves so that we would hopefully be a little bit to the east of where we thought these deer were going, and try to catch them in places where they'd be crossing in front of us versus like coming from directly above us or something like that. So that was a little bit of a, just like a burden we were going to have to bear the whole week because of it. But, I think here, I don't know. I'd want to say that I don't know. I was going to say they're less pressured than like Michigan deer or at-home deer, but I don't know. I mean, these deer get hammered there. For some reason, they're just a little bit dumber, I guess. I don't know how to describe it, but
Mark, I almost wonder if it's because they're just so used to having people in and out of there, that they just take a little bit more. They just allow a little bit more of that human odor to be present before they really get boogered up in there. I wonder if that's part of it. There are so many people in there, not even just hunters, but just like people recreating back there, people recreating on the river. They may just be used to a little bit more human pressure than, or be more tolerant of it than some other places. Yeah,
I think there's something to be said to that. It was just, at times it almost felt like we were suburban bow hunting with the types of stuff we were seeing. Like that night we were glassing, I saw a guy who was not a hunter. He was like wearing like a blue jogging suit, like taking a walk on the edge of this public land, and these deer were out in the field, and they kind of looked at him and then just went about their business. And this guy just kept on his stroll. So, I knew we were operating under different rules than some places I hunt. At the same time, as soon as hunting season begins and hunters start pushing into these places where deer aren't used to it, we knew that would also still have an impact. So, night number one, I decided to go back to the general area where I saw these two slammers last year. I saw two really, really good bucks last year. I was like 60 yards from them, just a little bit too far for me to feel comfortable. I made a move last year, and then, I made that move right to the spot, but those guys came in and did a bunch of crazy stuff, and I never saw those big ones again. But I did see a couple other decent bucks within range that I passed on. So I thought this year was like, okay, I know this little spot seemed to funnel a bunch of movement down into this little area. It happened 3 different nights last year. I want to hunt that same general line of movement, but I know there's going to be other hunters coming in, so I'm going to backtrack a ways. And I positioned myself, I don't know, maybe 150 yards further back in the cover. So basically went due north, trying to follow this main trail system that I thought they'd been using to come in. And I positioned myself up there closer into the bedding where I thought they'd be coming from, so that even if other hunters come in, I'll be deeper than they will be. Even if these deer move later in the evening, I'll be far enough back that I'll catch them in daylight. And basic gist of night number one was that I thought I was in a great place. And I saw some deer, saw some does, saw some fawns, saw a couple small bucks. About an hour before dark, had 2 other hunters come through that I could actually see biking in on a trail that I could see about 100 yards away from me. So 2 other bikers came past me and heading towards where Josh was. And then I saw one decent 2-year-old buck, and that was it for night number one. So it was pretty disappointed because I thought opening night of the season, I'm in a spot that I know these bucks like to come through, and didn't see a good one. Plus these 2 other guys. So that was my first day. Josh, you want to give me the highlight of your night? What happened there?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of stopped at that same area that I'd hunted last year that I liked. I did go in, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 yards deeper than I was the year before, get back in a little bit more into the cover. But I also still wanted to be able to see this kind of, it's almost like a secluded alfalfa field back in there on the private. So I wanted to be able to see that and see if there's deer coming off the private or kind of how they were using that this year. So I kind of got set up and just pretty slow for the first part of the night. Saw some does and fawns. And I saw those same 2 hunters coming down that trail that I could also see. They worked their way down to me, but they kept moving on, which is probably good news. As best as it could have been. And then things started to pick up a bit towards the last half hour or so of light. Had a couple, like a bachelor group of probably a couple 1.5-year-old bucks. And I think there's like 1 2.5-year-old in there. That was a decent little, like a little forky 6-point with like a 7th point coming off his main beam, like just a nub. But he was wide. He was like to his ears. He's kind of a cool looking buck. And I saw that deer, and then I had randomly turned around, just kind of checked behind me, checked the alfalfa field. I had my back to the alfalfa field. I was in the saddle, using the tree as cover from deer that would have been coming out of the cover towards the alfalfa. So I had positioned myself where I had to turn around to see the alfalfa field, and I had turned around at one point, and there was what was the term? Justin, a slammer.
Slammer, yep.
Slammer buck. Slammer. Yeah, slammer buck standing there on that kind of main access trail that probably a half hour ago, there was 2 kids walking their bikes down. There's just big old buck standing right on this trail and kind of trotting along. And he was now headed, he would have been headed west. And I lost sight of him. But that was obviously confirmation that I was in a good little zone there. There's some good deer in that area. Saw a lot of deer that night. And then saw one really good buck that I knew was definitely a shooter. So couldn't really tell where he went, but kind of at last light, I saw him retrace that trail he had taken and head into the alfalfa under the cover of darkness there. I could just see him through my binoculars before I was ready to get packed up for the night. So definitely a good one in that general area. Couldn't tell you where exactly he came from, but he was close.
Yeah. Josh, how big is what's a good one out there, you think?
Yeah, I bet that deer was probably He was in velvet, so he probably looked a little bit bigger than he actually was. I bet he was 140-inch deer.
Yeah.
Real nice
cool.
tine length, and I just got a quick glimpse of him, but kind of judging by that, I would have seen his right side. Judging by kind of what I saw from the tine length and everything, and I bet he was 130, 140-inch deer. Really nice public land deer for sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, so our plan for this trip was for the first first handful of days of the trip, our plan was to focus just on the evenings, because there's no way to get into this stuff without being in front of and alongside these big alfalfa fields where all these deer are feeding at night. So there's no good way to get in the morning without these deer knowing you're going in. So our thought was, let's try to have, at least 3 really good unscrewed up evening hunts. And then if we still haven't killed, once we get towards those last parts of the trip, then we would start hunting mornings and just throw caution to the wind and see what would happen, so we could up our odds a little bit in a different kind of way. So we didn't hunt that next morning. The thought process then was that, Josh was going to make a play on that buck he saw, but I felt kind of lost. Like, I hadn't seen anything worth making a move on after my first night. So I'm sitting here thinking, well, one of my ideas was to push in deeper from that. But then we had this other task, which was we wanted to go put some cameras on the other side of the property, way over by that other access point, just to see, like, is there anything going on over there? And like I mentioned, like, we did see there was some green food on that side too, so there probably was deer. But at the same time, that was also a spot that's easier to access. There's like an easier parking lot to get, settled in. There's an easier trail to get into that side. So I kind of had this assumption that, if there was going to be more pressure, it would be on that side. But I kept going back and forth in my head. I'm like, well, I could go back in where I went and push in kind of blind and find something, or I could just like suck it up, be the guy that goes and puts cameras on the west side and go in there and see what might happen. I don't want to just assume it's blown up, because maybe it's not. And that spot was the spot that Josh had that night where he saw like 60 deer and 15 bucks. So maybe there haven't been people there yet. And if there haven't been people there yet, it actually could be really good. So I was going back and forth between like assuming there's going to be a bunch of people and it's going to suck, or maybe I should go there and check it out and see what happens. So I finally decided, you know what, I'll go. I'll just go and see, and we can check that off the bot. We can check it off the map. Either I have a great hunt, or we learn that that spot's not the place to go. So I went over there, hiked in, hung a camera, and my game plan originally was to, even though I was going to go on this side, knowing that there was probably it was kind of like this high risk, high reward kind of thing, I still was like, I'm still going to go deep in the cover. I'm still going to go way back in there, so that even if people do show up, it won't blow up my hunt. But as I got in there, I got just under a mile in, there's this spot that Josh was able to watch last year on that first night, where a ton of these deer cross into the alfalfa. There's like 3 different fences that all come together, and like these are like, low barbed wire fences. And there's 3 of them that all come together, and there's a couple like strands down, and then there's a gate that's lower. And so I think because of that reason, a lot of the deer cross out of the cover right here. Problem is, it's right next to that access trail, and it's like the easiest spot you could get to. If you wanted to walk in down this main trail, you would get here and you'd be like, oh, wow, this is an obvious great spot. This is where all these deer cross by. So I got to that point, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm going to cross the fence. I'm going to hike another, like, I don't know, third of a mile in here or something like that to get back in this cover. But then I had this little like feeling in my head. I was like, God, there were so many deer that came through here last year. And that was like the 3rd or the 4th day of the season, and they were still doing it. Now, after that day, other people showed up and it got screwed. But I don't know what's been happening here the last night. This is only day 2 of the season, so I was basically saying, I was trying to determine, like, hey, if no one was in here last night, this might still be dynamite. And it's actually a concentrating feature that, would really concentrate movement if they're still doing it, and I'd be able to see it, versus if I go deep in there in the cover, it's just a jungle. And I'm kind of, I'm going to see what's happening in a 40-yard radius, and I better hope I pick the one feature that's right, because there's a whole lot more area that they might be passing through, and I'm making a blind guess on it. So again, I'm back and forth, and finally I decide to settle on the riskier option, which was hunting close to that crossing, close to the access trail, close to the food. And it was either going to be the stupidest night ever, and I was going to have it blown up with hunters, and I'm going to sit there and feel like an idiot, or these deer would be still on their normal summer pattern. It would actually come right by, and I get a shot at one.
Mark, let me ask you something here.
Yeah.
How early were you in there? I mean, like, presumably you didn't walk in there and there's somebody hanging there already. Like, what time were you going in?
Correct. End of shooting light was around 8:30 p.m., and we were getting in there, I'd say around 4-ish. I think we ended up going in progressively later every day, but I think on that second day, we might have even been in there like 3:30.
We were in there pretty early. Mark's right. I think it was right around 4:00. Those first couple nights we were getting in there.
So those people that you guys kept seeing that were walking by you, were they just trying to get deeper, or like, did you ever figure that out?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different examples. In previous years, there were some people that were going in further, but seemingly hunting like close to the private, but going past in this location. On the west side, that was the case, because there's actually a spot where the private land, this main trail continues onto the private land. And we found out by talking to some other hunters that some locals had permission to cross that private land that we couldn't do, but other people did have access to do. On the side that Josh hunted, that we both hunted night number 1, and that Josh was hunting night number 2, we historically had not seen other people hike in that far coming from the public. We'd seen people hike a short distance in because they're coming off the private.
Yeah.
So in my case, though, on night number 2, I'm just under a mile from the public access, but pretty close to the private. So I think I was 100 yards off the private, off that field. So if someone came in there, they wouldn't have to go all that terribly far, and they'd be right there and right on me. But I don't know. For whatever reason, I decided, I got to try it. I have to try it before assuming that it's screwed up already. And to make a long story short, I sat there most of the night and saw nothing. And then we get to prime time, the final hour of the day, and I see a flash of movement up ahead of me, up towards like the fields. And I remember at first, I'm like, a deer got past me? And I throw out my binoculars and I look at him, and it's not a deer. It is a hunter. And he's sneaking in with like an arrow knocked. He's like spot and stalk on the ground, sneaking down this trail towards me. And he ends up walking like right in my direction. I whistle at him, waved, and he looked up and saw me and had that like deer in the headlights look, like, oh no. We both probably had the same
It wasn't
thought.
one of the hunting public guys, was it?
No, it wasn't. But he was.
Wasn't Zach Farrenball, was it?
He definitely was taking a page. He was taking a page out of Zach's book.
He probably listened to your podcast from 3 weeks ago.
You probably did. So God bless this guy. He saw me. He waved, and then he turned and went back the other way. So that was the best case scenario there, at least. But I did think, well, this will be interesting, because he just walked up this way, blowing his wind, basically, having walked that whole direction, final hour daylight, and blown his wind with the way the wind was going that day. He would have basically blown his wind across everything I was hoping deer would come through. And then turned around, went back. So my hope was like, okay, best case, he'd just keep on going a long ways back. But if he just goes a little ways back the way he came and sets up, he'll be really blown into all the stuff that I was hoping would be safe from a wind perspective. Light fades. We're down like the last 10 minutes of light. I haven't seen any deer yet. In my head, I'm like, well, this was the stupid hunt you figured it'd be. You didn't see anything. It was a bust. Well, at least now you know. Now we focus on the other side. But last 10 minutes, all of a sudden I hear like crunching and crashing and stuff from behind me. And here's a doe and a fawn and another doe and a fawn. And they're coming out like 20 yards from me, heading right towards that gap in the fence. And now it's like 5 minutes left, and I'm hearing more movement, but you just can't see it. It's dark enough now that we're down to like the last like 4 minutes or 3 minutes. I keep like looking at my phone and then pull up my binos and trying to see these deer. It's enough that like I need my binoculars up to really see what's happening off further into the cover. And we're down to just like those last couple minutes, and I see another bigger body deer come into like a little opening, and I pull up my binoculars, and it's a shooter buck. It's like a nice hard horned. This isn't like a giant buck, but for this trip, for me, he was definitely a shooter. Maybe like 120, hard horned, 8-pointer looking deer, but he's like behind a tree. I can see him through pine boughs. And he's standing there, and he just is there. He's not moving. He stopped walking. Some does are walking past. He's just kind of looking around. I'm looking at my phone. I'm like, God dang, like 2 minutes left. I need him to go like another 5 yards in either direction for me to be able to get a shot. He's within range. I would say he was right around that 30-ish yard mark, but just no way I could get a shot. And so I let out I decided to do just a little contact grunt, just like a little like rap, just in case maybe I can get him to be curious and do something. I let that little rap, and it does get him to move. He kind of like bounces back a couple steps, back the way he came, but doesn't stop in the lane. So he bounces back a couple steps, still within range, but still behind cover. And as I am panning with my binoculars over to his new spot, I see another deer step out behind him. And this is maybe like 15, 20 yards behind him. And this one's like a big shooter. Like this one's like a 140 plus buck in velvet. But he's like 55, 60 yards away. And that's definitely not a shot I was going to take in the last fading moments of light. And that was it. Light faded. They were right there out, just, the one was in range, one was just out of range, but no clear shot. I basically left that hunt feeling pretty happy about it because I'd taken this risk. It almost seemed like it was going to be a really stupid, worthless night, and they ended up doing almost what I thought they would do, right? They came through. They still had not been so pressured that they wouldn't do what they were going to do, and I was just, a couple branches away from killing one. So that was encouraging because now I had something to work off of. I knew that for day 3, I could make a move on what I saw and hopefully get in behind them and catch them earlier. Even if they had been pressured, even if they did smell me or the other guy and decide to move later, I thought I could adjust for that. So that day 2 ended up pretty good for me. Josh, day 2 was pretty good for you too, right?
Yeah. Day 2 was another decent day for me. I adjusted again, or I guess I adjusted for the first time. On day 2 there, I had moved 40 or 50 yards to what would have been my west. A lot of the deer I saw the night before had been using a different trail than what I had set up on the night before. I think I only had like one doe and maybe like 1 1.5-year-old buck use that trail that I thought they might use that previous night. A lot of the other deer were shifted, 40, 50 yards to my west. So I moved further that way to get set up. And I was really in deer all night within range, just not the right deer, unfortunately. But again, getting towards last light, a lot of the movement was pretty late. At least of the better deer we were seeing. It kind of like, it seemed all week it kind of be like in 2 waves. Like that first wave was pretty early movement. Does, fawns, some young bucks. And then really, anything of note wasn't moving until pretty late. Last half hour, 15 minutes, something like that. So again, late movement. Ended up seeing, I'm trying to remember exactly what all I saw that night, but the key part of that night was just before maybe last 5-10 minutes of light. I saw a really nice 8-pointer, different deer than the night before. Was like broadside at 50 yards. Some junk in between me and him. Maybe could have squeezed off a shot. Man, that's a pretty far shot on a whitetail for me. Just wasn't quite confident taking that shot. He was on alert. There was a doe, I think, blowing back in the cover. I'm not sure what would have alarmed her because she was not near me. I don't think she smelled me. My wind was blowing the other direction. So something had her on edge, which had some other deer on edge. And just, again, 50-yard shot was not one I wanted to take on that deer. And while all that was happening, I looked further to my west, and there is another deer walking through another trail. Again, further, just out of range, further to my west even more. And then behind that, probably 2.5-year-old deer was a really, really nice 8-point. I'm not exactly sure what he was in terms of like size, but definitely a big body on him, great tine length. And I got some good eyes on those 2 deer where they crossed into the private, and made a mental note of that. And again, kind of like found myself in between 2 shooter bucks on either side of me. So it's kind of in a little bit of a interesting dynamic of which way do I move to the next night, maybe, to try to make a play on them. So yeah, another good night, another 2 close encounters with really nice bucks. Just feeling like they were maybe one step ahead of me both nights at that point so far.
We were feeling pretty good after that night, weren't we?
Yeah, we were feeling real good after that night.
Yeah.
And both getting into good deer.
Yeah. Now, it should be pointed out. So we get done with a hunt like that, right? And then we are moving every day pretty much because we're running gun hunting with sticks and a saddle. So shooting light ends at like 8:30. Then we have to tear down our whole set in the dark. So we're maybe down out of the tree 15 minutes later. In some cases, we had to wait for deer to get past us. So let's say like 8:45, 9 o'clock, we get out of the tree. And then we have about a 45-minute walk to hike out, about between 1.5 miles and 2 miles to hike out. So you're talking about not getting back to the truck till getting close to 10 o'clock at night. We get back to the truck at like 10 o'clock. And like on night number 2, I had to get my vehicle and then drive all the way to the other access point where Josh was. So we get there. Takes us 10 minutes to get undressed, packed up, and going. So we're packed up and ready to go a little after 10. And then we have an hour drive back to the place we're staying. So we weren't getting home every night until after 11. So we're making dinner at like 11:15 at night, eating dinner, doing whatever work we have to get done, and getting to sleep, like 12:30, 1 o'clock every night. It was very exhausting from that perspective. It just felt like a grind, especially when we started hunting mornings. So I'll fast forward a little bit for what happened to me that night because I wanted to make a play on those bucks, of course. And my thought process was that I could get back behind them. And, basically what I did is I went in that evening. I got above where they came in. So now I knew like we had the southerly wind. I know the basic path. They were going basically from northeast to southwest. So I would get set up to the north and the west of the route that all those deer came through. And like all these deer came through a narrow swath. So I felt pretty confident with where they were going to be generally moving. And my idea was to get farther back in the cover and upwind of that spot so that even if they moved 10 minutes later, I would still be within range of them if they came through on that same general, route of travel. And I got in there and it looked really, really good. Like I found this area where all these trails came crossing together. It really felt like the spot. And got settled in, and I don't know, a couple hours before daylight, here come 3 people, but not hunters, like just random people, like shouting. It was like they were looking for something. First, I thought they lost their dog, and then I heard somebody say something about. It sounded like maybe he said arrow. Like, did you find your arrow? I thought they said that, so I'm like, oh, someone shot something, and then they're looking for the deer or something. But when I got a better look at these people, like, they did not look like hunters. So I don't know what they're doing, but they walked all over I'm in a jungle. Like I'm in a thick, nasty jungle of cover at this point. So I don't know why they were way back there, but I could never figure it out. They never went behind me too terribly far, but they definitely mucked a lot of stuff up. But they're out of there. The night comes to a close. 0 deer move past me until after shooting light. And then shooting light fades, and then I start hearing deer moving. So deer start moving past me, but after shooting light. So super disappointed. Like I thought it was going to be the night. I really felt confident with my setup. And then, that whole thing happened. That was my evening. Did not go too well. Josh, your night number 3 was kind of similar, right?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, very similar. I readjusted again and set myself up in a position where I could see and have a good shot to that trail that I saw that good buck walk the night before, and then also was able to shoot behind me to the other trail I had set up on the night before. I kind of gave up on that one buck he was like near the main access trail. I just didn't think that that was a super high percentage spot where that deer would be again. So I had moved again, and it was a pretty slow night. I think that was the night I saw a moose come through, like a cow moose come through. She read the script perfectly. If she would have been a big old mature buck, it would have been game over. But it was a pretty quiet night that night 3.
Yeah. So we're halfway through the trip. I was definitely starting to stress at this point. And I'm thinking about, okay, there was all these people like crazy in here. The day before, there was the other hunter. And I actually forgot that second night after I saw the 2-shooter bucks, not only was there the guy spot and stalking, but after dark, as I'm like tearing down my set, another hunter comes walking in along the edge of the private land. He'd been on the private land. He comes walking by. So there have been at least 2 hunters in there, plus these 3 random people. So as I'm trying to decide what to do for night number 4, one option was to try to push in deeper to where I was on this side and try to hopefully rediscover where these bucks are moving through deeper where they feel safer. But on this side, it's just an absolute jungle. Like I could not find any rhyme or reason for why these deer were doing what they're doing, other than when I saw that one route that one night these deer used. So I could either do that, or I thought to myself, or I can go back to the east side where Josh was and where I had previous success. And over there, there's like a channel of the river that runs back into this really good cover. And I always thought to myself that you could use the channel of that river as a concentrating feature, right? There's going to be spots where these deer want to cross, and those will be spots you'll be able to find. So I ultimately decided, you know what, I could just like go hodgepodge through the jungle on the west side, or I could relocate to the east, go back into that section that I know there's deer because we saw them the first night scouting. The previous year, I know I'd seen them coming in, and there's this island back there that I know there's deer. They've got to be bedding on this island. So I could go in there and find the best set of crossings. And like that is something that could actually concentrate movement and give me like a good chance at a bow shot versus going blindly the other side. And so I finally ultimately decided to do that. I slipped back in. This is a full 2+ mile hike in to get to this spot. And I got back to this river channel, and I walked this river channel like right into the belly of the beast. I mean, like really thick jungle type stuff, and found where there was 4 different crossings, all in this one narrow stretch of the river channel, coming off that island onto the mainland, set up there. And, the moral of the story there is that it came really, really, really close to working out. Had a bunch of deer come through, and ultimately had a shooter buck, a nice velvet. I think he was a 9 or 10 pointer, probably in that like 125 to 130 type category, come through and right at 30 yards. But there was these darn bushes, like little willow bushes or something, that he was walking behind. And so I can see his head and his back line, and I just can't shoot through these bushes with good conscience. I'm trying to like stand up taller or kneel down lower or like get different angles to see if there's like some kind of hole I can find that I think I could slip an arrow through. And I can't find anything that I can get a reasonable shot at. So a super nice buck goes walking by 30 yards. I think he was even at 25 yards at one point as he kind of angled his way out, but no good shot. What I did see, though, that night was that buck and the doe that was with him, and then another like 15 deer, including another what I thought was a buck. I could never see his head, but I could just see his big, dark gray body. They all did the same basic thing, just most of them a little bit too far out of range. They were all following this tree line along the edge of the island that goes from northwest to southeast, and they were all angling down the edge of this island. So I thought to myself, I can relocate tomorrow for tomorrow morning. I decided we're going to start hunting mornings now, and I can get to a new tree where I'd be able to shoot to where this buck was, but also to where all the rest of those deer were another like 30 yards further back. So after dark, I tore down my set in the dark that night and actually went and set up my stand or my saddle platform that night before going out because I wanted to be there in the morning. So did all that and then hiked the 2 miles out after that. So that was night number 4. Really close call. Thought I was set up for a dynamite hunt in the morning. I thought these deer, I mean, the fact that I saw 20-some deer all funneled down this one tree line following the edge of this island, it just seemed like they're going to do it again. And now I'm set up for the next morning. They're going to come back, and they're going to come back to bed, and this is going to be it. I felt really good about that. Josh, night number 4, you did see?
Yep. I did not see any shooters that night. I saw a ton of deer. I pushed back in deeper to the cover. I had crossed this little channel as well. I got into this little spot. It was like a point basically where there was this channel, and then there was a dry creek bed that runs out then to the main river there. And it was just kind of this like perfect little terrain feature that I thought would kind of dictate some movement from the cover, from the thick, nasty cover. A lot of the deer that I had seen the previous nights, I could tell they were crossing this little channel somewhere in this area, and then they'd make their way to the alfalfa fields. And man, I saw a ton of deer that night. It was like this perfect little staging area where they were just coming out of thick stuff, and it was almost this little bowl with like either side of this little flat, and the cottonwoods had like a berm on it, and they kind of come up over this berm and they just kind of browse around in this flat. And it was like early movement and movement all night long. A lot of little bucks, a lot of does, a lot of fawns. But again, just kind of waiting for that later movement of those older deer, and it just never happened that night. But I felt really good about that spot. I felt like if there's going to be something that's going to happen for me, it's going to be in this general area. So I was feeling pretty good for that just leaving all my stuff up there and hunting that spot in the morning too.
Yeah. So the next morning was going to be the day, right? We're going to go start hunting in the mornings. After seeing what we'd seen and all these people and stuff, we decided, you know what, we gotta give it a shot. We're way deep in the cover. To get into the morning, we do have to go past some of these fields. We're just gonna take it. We're gonna cross these fields. We're gonna walk normal, and hopefully we'll be able to get away with it for a couple days. And we'll be far enough back that hopefully there will be deer that weren't bothered by us that will still transition back. And I'm going to give you the whole rest of my hunt right now because I don't want to keep people here sitting for too long. This is going.
We're on the edge of our seat, Mark.
Yeah. Here's what happened.
I'm pumped about this morning hunt, man.
This morning hunt definitely felt really good. I get in there that next morning. We got in there super early to the parking lot. We park our truck, and another truck parks up. And I'm thinking, like, there's no way nobody else is doing this. We're here 2 hours before daylight. We're hiking in 2+ miles to our spot. Nobody in a Western state hunts whitetails like that. Like, no one likes whitetails enough to do stupid stuff like this. But someone else pulls up next to us, gets out of their vehicle, and I go over there to see like what they're doing. And it's another hunter. We start talking to this dude. He's got a saddle and climbing sticks. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm going right back to that same place. I'm like, no freaking way do we find the one whitetail nut that's out here a million miles away from whitetail country, crazy as us. So he ends up hiking with us all the way back. And I cut into the cover sooner than he did. He was going to keep going and was actually hunting closer to the food. But so here's another hunter that does this thing with us. I slip into this spot that I'd made the move from last night, and the basic gist of what happens is that deer start piling in, and they start all following a consistent travel route, just like they did the night before. But instead of being on my side of the island, they all were on the opposite side of the island. Imagine this island is kind of like a hot dog. Like it's a thin, narrow hot dog, like I said, that runs from northwest down to southeast. And there's a tree line and cover on the outside of the island, like all around the border of the island, but it's kind of open and grassy in the middle. And so the night before, they'd all been on that southern edge, heading down to go feed in the fields. And they seemed like they were going to go all the way to the bottom of the island, to the end of the hot dog, and then cross down there. And then this morning, I sat there, positioned on that south side, but instead of coming along the south edge, they took the north edge. And here come a bunch of deer, here come a bunch of little bucks, and here comes a shooter buck. Passes by like 65, 70 yards away from me maybe, but along that north edge. So saw that, was super disappointed. Wasn't sure if it was the same deer or not that I saw the night before. This one was hard-horned, so maybe it was. I didn't get as long of a look at this one this time. And then I waffled back and forth like, okay, do I chase that movement and move somewhere else? Do I move over to that side for tonight? Or is my belief that maybe, in the mornings they go that way back to bed, but in the evenings they're going to come back and do what they did last night? I decided that was more likely the case. I thought, you know what, I got to at least sit here at night and see if they're going to come back down this way. And I did. I sat that night. They did not come my way. They came out on the north again and followed that edge down. Didn't see a shooter. The next morning's our last day of the hunt. I decided I was going to just get kind of aggressive now. I actually slipped in on the ground and snuck in on foot and set up in a bush, like a clump of bushes, and sat in the ground along that north edge and hoped that these bucks would come back through. A bunch of deer did end up coming through within range and passed by like 6 yards from where I was sitting, but never was a buck I wanted to shoot. Last night, I decided that I would just spot and stalk and just, again, ground pound my way all the way up that island, all the way to the tippy top northwestern corner where the bed, like the beddiest, nastiest bedding cover ever was at, and basically got like right on the edge of it. Because at this point now, it's been a day and a half since I saw a shooter. My thought is like, okay, they're on to us. I know where they're bedding. I'm going to get like right there. This is the last chance. And they're not moving as much as they were, but I know they're still in here, but maybe I can catch them, move 50 yards out of their bedding or 10 yards out of their bedding. I'll be right there. And the ending of my story was that they did not. I did not end up seeing a good buck come out of that bedding. I was right in the thick of it, and I'm sure that deer were in there at times, but they weren't in there that night, and I did not kill a buck. So that was the end of my trip.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co, and make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Josh, I want you to tell me about the climax of your part of the hunt.
Yeah, do I have to? I don't have much more to talk about either, right?
You can choose to. You can choose whether or not you want to talk about the end of your hunt.
Yeah, I'll talk about it. That next morning hunt was pretty uneventful. Not much going on. But kind of the climax of my hunt would have been that Friday night. So second to last day, and the movement kind of patterns were very similar to the night before. I was like, all right, this is good. These deer are still, because this would have been my third sit now in this general spot. Feeling good about it. some of that early movement. Young bucks, does, fawns, all moving through there, all kind of just picking their way through, not really alarmed or feeling pressured. They didn't seem like they were pressured much, and I was like, well, all I need is for one of these big deer in the area to come in here and feel comfortable and do the same thing, and I'm in the game. And man, about 10 after 8, something like that, I had about 15-20 minutes of shooting light. Caught some movement over to my right, coming out of thick stuff, and there's a nice buck. And see some more movement behind him, and there's a really big buck. And then another, a little bit smaller 8-point, but still a shooter, and velvet comes out behind him. And they work their way up over this little berm and are right out in front of me at 40 yards. I've got 3 shooter bucks, with one really, really big deer, probably the biggest deer of my life that I'm going to have an opportunity at. And they just kind of keep feeding.
Let me guess, Josh. Hold on. You shot the small one.
Not everyone writes the same story.
I wish I maybe would have. I wish I maybe would have gone after that one. I may be telling a different story right here. But they kind of keep working from my right to my left, and they get into a spot where if they kind of keep working up this same trail, they're going to be at like 25 yards. First one kind of gets to that spot, and he starts to kind of veer away from me. And I was like, oh shoot. That big buck is second, and he's about just a little over 30 yards, and he's pretty calm, but he looks like he's on the same trajectory of this other buck. And I need to make a move now if I'm going to get a shot at this deer. And he was kind of quartered away from me, still good position, and I draw back and I go in just to total blackout autopilot mode, like the bad kind of autopilot where I just rush everything, and just the moment gets the best of me. And I the next thing I know, I'm looking at an arrow that went under him.
Oh, damn.
And I missed that buck, and I wish I could tell you what I did. But I've been replaying that moment over and over and over in my head, and I think I just rushed it. I rushed it. I punched the trigger. I didn't check my bubble level. I didn't do the things that I know I should have done. And it cost me the biggest deer of my life up to this point. And I've been kicking myself ever since that moment. I had been gone for at this point like 11 days from my family or something like that. I had a work meeting out in Idaho before this. So I'd been out there for 4 or 5 days before the hunt. Now we're on the second to last day of the hunt, and I just felt all the weight of the world was on my shoulders at that moment. Just like this feeling of failure, and like just a lot of doubt running through my head. And it was a sucky position to be in. Never feels good. No, not the first time I've missed. I'm sure it won't be the last, but that one's going to sting for a long, long time, just given the scenario, and having just an awesome deer, probably like 140, 150 inch buck, public land in a heavily pressured area, and shoot under him. Just not a good feeling. But got down, that deer kind of bounded off, kind of looked around, all 3 of them. They didn't really spook out of there. Kind of went back in the cover, and before dark, I saw the deer that I missed kind of work his way back across this little opening in this flat, I don't know, about 70, 80 yards out from me, and just kind of browsed on through and just kind of kept, steered somewhat clear of that area. But he didn't seem too spooked. I don't think he really knew what happened. I got down, found my arrow, perfectly clean miss. There's nothing, no hair, no blood, nothing. So, best case scenario if you're going to miss, right? I mean, clean miss is good. And I went right back in there that next morning. I was like, you know what? This is, I know that deer is in here. He didn't seem too alarmed. And I actually saw that son of a gun again that next morning, come in about 60 yards to my south, cross the river, across the creek there at a different spot. But he was like half hour, 45 minutes after daylight, just working his way back in there like nothing was wrong. So a part of me felt like I was maybe still in the game for that last hunt of the trip. But ultimately, that last night was probably my slowest night. Saw a few deer, saw a couple young bucks, but that bachelor group of three good shooter bucks never showed back up. So I left Idaho with my tail between my legs for sure. So
that was it. That was
Man,
the hunt.
That's tough to hear, man. I hate that for you.
Yeah, not fun, and it's hasn't gotten really any better. Probably be a while.
Yeah. Well, you're right, and that it could have been worse. I mean, a clean miss is sometimes a blessing. Rather than a bad hit or something. There's always a positive side to it.
Yep. I feel good about that. I just wish I could have controlled my emotions or buck fever or whatever you want to call it. I just wish I could have controlled myself a little bit better in that moment. And that's why I said maybe I should have taken a shot at that little bit of a smaller buck. But at that moment, I don't think it would have mattered. You got three good deer coming in on you like that. It wouldn't have mattered what deer I shot at. I think it would have been just a cluster. So. But yeah, you live and you learn and try to learn from that the next time I'm in that scenario, and hopefully I'll have a better outcome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not a moral of both of our stories, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you gotta take the good with the bad. You gotta learn to recover from the unexpected. You gotta adjust, grow, try to find the silver linings on all these things, because no hunt ever really goes the way you plan it to. Very rarely does it go exactly how we want. Very infrequently do we think one thing and have it happen just that kind of way. And 9 times out of 10, you go on a hunt and you don't end up achieving whatever goal you had. So it's these kinds of pills we got to swallow as deer hunters, I think, are always bitter in the moment. But I think that with time, I guess from my experience at least, you're always better for that medicine. Give it enough time.
Yep.
So I think that there's maybe something to that with both of our stories, even though your pill was much less bitter to swallow, Clay, since you got to wash it down with a nice steak or two. We both we all learned a thing or two, and we I don't know. I mean, I had a lot of frustration coming out of this hunt, not ending the way I wanted to, but at the same time, I guess the only thing that, and I fall back on this every time I have an unsuccessful hunt, so it's the same old, but I guess I gotta remind myself that, did you do everything you could? Did you put in the work you knew you should have? Did you leave it on the field? By the end of the trip, I was hiking 8 miles a day on a whitetail hunt in rubber knee-high boots, packing in and out a tree stand or a saddle and sticks every time. I mean, I was busting my balls trying to get this thing done, and it didn't work out. But, I had a couple of really close calls, and, we battled through adversity, and, it is what it is. And you just got to accept the results and, not beat yourself up too much if it doesn't fall the way you want it to, I guess. And so that's kind of where my head's at now.
Mark, here's my question to you. My question is, I mean, hearing the story and not being involved in the drama and the amount of work and seeing these people, which can be so disheartening, and then not bringing home a deer, which is disheartening. I mean, it sounds like you were in a good place. I mean, both you guys, for 2 guys to go hunting on public land and 1 guy to have a legitimate shot at a 140-inch plus deer, I mean, that sounds like a win. So are you going back? Going back to this spot?
Yeah, man, that's the ultimate question. I've been going back and forth on 1,000 times because still the potential is absolutely there. If a couple little tiny things went differently, we could have been talking about how Josh killed a 150-inch and I killed a 130-inch whitetail on public land. It would have been awesome. We would have been
all these guys.
Yeah. Despite having seen all these guys. So,
yeah.
So part of me says, yeah, we should absolutely go back because we're this close. We're the tiniest of tiniest little bits of details away from having the ultimate success. On the flip side, there's this other part of me, like when I look at this Western whitetail hunt that I do every year at the beginning of the season, it's like supposed to be my fun hunt. This is supposed to be the one where you go somewhere where people don't care about whitetails, and the whitetails are kind of dumb, and there's lots of them, and you can go there and you see lots of whitetails, and it's just like super. I mean, I kind of want it to be like your hunt, Clay, like up in Manitoba. Like I've had other Western whitetail hunts where there's tons of deer. They're not too worried about people. There's nobody else out there hunting them, and you just get to be in a beautiful place and hunt deer being deer, and it's fun and do some fishing. So I was hoping that this trip could be that kind of trip because I kind of need that to prepare myself for the grind that's the rest of the season. But this hunt ended up just being like a grind of all grinds, right? I mean, I think I hiked like 40 plus miles chasing whitetails in rubber boots. And, you know, like I described, like, especially when we were hunting mornings, right? So we had to get up at 3:30 in the morning in order to get set, drive down to this place, hike in an hour, do the hunt. Then I hike 2 miles back out. Then we'd do something midday. Then we'd hike back in 2 miles, get set up, hunt, pull down the set, hike back out. So I'm like, we're not getting home and to sleep till 1 o'clock at night. We're waking up at 3:30. We're hiking 8 miles a day. I mean, it was just a suffer fest there for a while. And so part of me is like, you have enough suffer fests during other parts of the season. Does this one need to be one too? Maybe I just want to go try to find a easier, fun spot for this hunt.
So I think what Mark's trying to say is the four of us are going to Manitoba next year. I think.
Yeah.
Hey, game for that.
That might be the case.
Yeah, man.
I was gonna say it seems like you guys did a lot of things right, and the stuff that seemed to be like that went wrong was somewhat out of your control as far as like trying to get away from people and whatnot. But like if you went back to the same spot now, it being a third time, like what kind of things would you do differently?
Well, I can tell you what I do really fast. I would basically cut off what I did on nights 1 through 3 and skip all that. So I would skip the kind of like, I went further back into the cover night number 1 than I did all of year 1, but not far enough. And then day 2 and day 3, I made that play on the other side where, you know, I almost had a shot there, but I think like there's just too much uncertainty over there. There's just people all over the place there. So I think I would have skipped all that and I would have jumped right back to where this island is. I think if I were to go back, I'm not hunting anywhere except for these islands, like the farthest back stuff you can get to. And I think if I had more time to work on this island and or others even deeper in there, I think that's where we could catch these bucks in a way that they're not like nobody else is going back there. It's like I finally knock on wood. Even if someone's willing,
that's not true.
They might now.
Well, you did have one guy.
Someone back
You're
there
right.
With me that
The last morning.
So
that's true.
But I think you're right. I think that's exactly the ticket, though. Just get back into these areas that are heavier in cover, where less people are likely to go crossing the creek or the channel or whatever you want to call it. Anything that we can do to put some more terrain features that other people aren't willing to go through, just start there. Just cross off the rest of it and get back in there deeper from day one.
Yeah,
and I actually think I'd try to hunt the mornings more, like the entire trip. Maybe I think we found that I think we're going to put more pressure on it, but I think we found that we can get in there and hopefully we kill early and then not have to worry about it. But definitely decent morning movement, better than I thought there would be.
Yeah, we seem to be able to get away with that. So, yeah, I don't know. You could also say we should have just done exactly what we did again, and the tiniest thing could have got our way, and we might have worked out. But it's that's hunting, right? It just sometimes it falls your way, sometimes it doesn't. I the only thing I can tell you for certain is that I don't feel bad about what we did. Like we worked our tails off, we did a lot of things right, and it didn't fall our way. But I'm not going to beat myself over that too much.
Yeah. Well, sounds like a good hunt. I mean, you guys were on deer and it's kind of disheartening to not get much reward after that much work. But man, when it does come together, it'll be that much better. So.
Yep. That's the truth.
That's a cliche friend thing to say.
It is.
What I just said was like, classic. You should record that and like have it play on your phone,
Yeah.
like for when you need a little encouragement.
Yeah, but it's as cliche as it is, it's just the truth of it too.
Yeah.
That's
I need
it.
to drive around that with my truck for the next 3 months of the season. Just listen to Clay tell me that, so then get over this miss.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Hey, I last year I made a list of all the deer that got away that I felt like were killable. And I find that those deer are often more memorable than the racks I've got hanging here in my office. And I just went down and sat down and made a list. And as of last year, I had 11 deer that, I mean, I could tell you more about those hunts than the hunts that, were successful. And there's value in those animals.
Yeah.
There really is. And I like to think that because of those 11 deer, that's the reason I've got the deer that I've got on the wall. It just takes a lot of opportunity to kill a big deer. You just gotta get out there and do it.
Well, and you probably replay the moments from that hunt, or those ones that you don't bring home, more so than the ones you do, because it's like, okay, what could I have done differently, or what happened here to cause him to do this, or what happened here that caused me to do that. You just play those over and over in your mind, where you may think back, oh, that was an awesome hunt when I shot that deer and it all came together, but you're not maybe scrutinizing the details like you did on one that didn't happen.
Yeah,
For sure.
Well, boys, this one's gone longer than I thought, so we should probably wrap it up. But I think we all four had a hell of a week, hell of experience, learned some stuff, had some good times, had some bad times, and I guess that seems like an appropriate way to kick off a deer season, huh?
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty
Yep.
far for the course.
Yeah.
Yep.
And off we go to the races for yet more. we'll see.
That's right.
We'll see what happens next. But thank you, Josh, Clay, Justin. Appreciate you guys taking the time to round up and talk through all this stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks
Good
for
to talk with
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
And that is a wrap. Another episode's in the books. And, as is to be expected, another season is off to a start of some kind. It wasn't the start I wanted, but we learned some stuff. We had some close calls. We had a fun hunt in a lot of different ways. And, onward. You always learn, always grow. Take something from a hunt like this, use it as a kind of a jumping off point for the next one. So that's my game plan. Hope all of your hunts are going well if you're already out there. If not, get all those final pieces of work done. Get your head right, get your bow right, get your gear ready. It's game time. Any day now will be those opening days, and I'm excited for you. I'm excited for my own next hunt too. So until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. MeatEater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. MeatEater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, MeatEater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula, May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington, May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon, and May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.